We have a very special section to my right. It's the newlywed section. I won't comment any further. There should be 3 sheets altogether tonight. 3 worksheets on this. Well, there are 4 worksheets on this chapter. Maybe 5. And we start tonight in verse 11 as Peter continues his encouragement of a persecuted, scattered group of Christians. Dearly beloved. Now, your apostle on his knees is not unfamiliar to us. The apostle often begged us to do certain things. Paul says, dearly beloved, I beg you as strangers, where they were, made them strangers, and pilgrims scattered all over the place. Abstain from fleshly lusts, which war against the soul. There lived a man in Greece named Pythagoras. You remember in high school studying the Pythagorean Theorem, that the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the square of the other 2 sides. That came from Pythagoras' study of mathematics, but he also was a forerunner of a doctrine we call Gnosticism. Pythagoras decided that we were 2 individuals. Our soul was the good part, but our flesh was evil, and that made us 2 distinct individuals. This doctrine is called dualism. You have a good soul, but an evil body. That's 2 different beings to Pythagoras. His doctrine is thought to be Paul's doctrine by some critics today who write some very strange commentaries. If you'll open your New Testament to 2 Corinthians 4:16, we'll read that Paul said, though our outward man perish, our inward man is renewed day by day. And the Gnostic would say, see, Paul saw 2 different individuals in each person, not the way the Gnostic did. Paul's inward man is my soul, which gets refreshed every day. My outward man is the body in which that soul lives. It does not get refreshed every day. It gets weaker and weaker as the years go by. In fact, I'm so old now that my Social Security number starts with a 1. I'm not kidding, it does. That's old, isn't it? But the inward man is refreshed day by day. But Pythagoras' dual man was 2. And so eventually the Docetics picked up on that doctrine, one of whom was a man named Cerinthus. And they taught that Jesus was the evil one and the Christ was the good part, so that only Jesus died on the cross, the evil one, and the Christ stood in a cave and watched his death. He was the good one. But since Jesus and Jehovah were involved in creating flesh, that made them evil. And so the Docetic Gnostics had to invent their own God, whom they called a demiurge. If you're confused now, that's all right, so am I. And all the emanations from the demiurge, angels and Christ and Jehovah, they're all evil. Now, how do you know that? I just know it. That's why he's called a Gnostic, which means I know it. But you see, if your evil one is separate from your good one, then the evil one can't affect the good one. So when the good one is saved, no matter what the evil one does, that doesn't affect the good one. In other words, once you're saved, you're always saved. That's why I go to a Baptist barber. Want shaved? Gnostic doctrine is not dead, brothers and sisters. We still have people who claim that what they do in the flesh does not affect their souls once they believe. Because the moment they put that thought up here, they are saved. That's it. And it doesn't matter from then on what they do. In fact, I have said for years, publicly, privately, and to anyone who will listen, that if I were not a member of the New Testament church, I'd join the Baptist church, but I'd never go. And I certainly wouldn't give them any money, because once I'm saved, I'm always saved. And I don't need church or giving or practicing holiness or anything else. And so let me give you a thought. If you want to live it up, become a denominational person. Doesn't matter what you do from that point on. But look what Peter wrote here. He said that the fleshly lust war against the soul. That denies the Gnostic idea completely. Let's go to Romans 6:12 and listen to the Apostle Paul deny it. Paul told Christians, let not sin reign in your mortal body, that ye should obey it in the lust thereof. Why? It will destroy your soul. The entire gospel, according to John, was written to answer this Gnostic doctrine. That's why he started out, in the beginning was the Word. And then he said, and the Word, God, was made flesh. Boy, the Gnostic didn't like that a bit. Paul said that, or John said that's the way it is. John came to a bathhouse one day. Peter did, John came to a bathhouse one day where Cerinthus was bathing. And John ran out. Cerinthus, that docetic Gnostic. And John said, somebody said, why'd you run out? He said, I want the root to fall on me in there. This guy's a heretic. And this Gnostic heresy has been around forever and ever. It started in the Colossian church. They mixed Phrygian love of worship of angels, little Judaism, keeping days and so on, a little bit of Christianity, and some Greek philosophy. And so Paul said, philosophy, vain philosophy. Warned them against that doctrine called the Colossian heresy, and full blown, it became known as Gnosticism. And Peter here, in a forerunning answer to their doctrine, said, don't you pay attention to fleshly lusts, abstain from them. They will war against your soul. You have a bad habit? Do something else. If I say to myself, I need to diet, I will eat excessively. Because my brain says, you're not starving me. But if I decide to go out and run and not get near the dinner table, I've substituted something, and now I'm going to be able to lose some weight. But I cannot do it by just saying, I'm not going to do that anymore. I need to substitute something. Jesus taught that. He talked about a person who swept the house out of demons, left it without anything put in its place. What happened to the house? It became worse than it was before. Good advice for us. If we need to stop a bad habit, do something else. But if I sit there and think all day, I need to stop this, I'll be wanting to do it even more because it's up here now. So I need to think about something else. Trying to get over a boyfriend? Get another one. Unless you're a boy, then get a girl. We do like this. Little child a while ago in the hallway over there, I said, who's that? He said, Daddy. I said, who's that? He said, Mommy. I said, that boy can't live in America. You're not supposed to know the difference here now. We live in the most lustful, fleshly lustful country that's ever been on the face of the earth. This one is worse than Rome ever thought of being. Rome never allowed homosexuals to marry. We do. Let's abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul. Having your life honest among the Gentiles. I'm going to apply that to the communities in which we live. We ought to be honest with everyone with whom we deal. If we give our word, we ought to keep it. Why? Whereas they speak against you as evildoers, they don't like Christians. In fact, in this century, they accused the Christians of cannibalism. You know, they ate their Lord. Talking about the Lord's Supper, of course. So Christians were cannibals who ate their Lord. And that kind of criticism, they said the Christians are evil. In fact, Nero tried to blame the Christian for burning down Rome's apartment complex where all the poor people lived. And Nero didn't like it, so he burned it down and blamed the Christians. Whereas they speak against you as evildoers, they may by your good works, which they shall behold, glorify God in the day of visitation. I knew a man who worked in a factory, and there was a gentleman there who used the Lord's name in vain all the time. And this man who worked in the factory said to that gentleman one day, "Could you not use someone's name that you know better when you're talking about something?" From then on, that gentleman who had been using the Lord's name in vain called that man Pious Pete and Holy Joe and mocked him for several years. But when that man decided to go to the school of preaching, that guy did say to him finally, "You know what?" He said, "You never reacted to the mocking." I admire that. So it took several years, but he finally saw my good works and quit mocking me. And that's the guy I'm talking about, me. And what happens here when that happens? They glorify God in the day. He had to give honor to someone, even though he was critical of Christians and very much using God's name in vain. Somebody read 2 Peter 3:11 for us. Anyone who can read loudly, 2 Peter 3:11. Do you know what manner of Christian you ought to be? Got a letter from the IRS this week. I owe them $1,233, they said, because I received a stimulus last year, they said, and I didn't claim it on my form 2021, so I've got to pay it. The only problem is I never got a stimulus. How do you prove you didn't get something? Guess what I'm going to have to pay? But I have to. I cannot back out of that as a Christian. I can't even fight it. I'll just have to pay it. I'll take it in my collection after services tonight, though. Try to be honest as the best you can do in this world. And it's hard to be honest in this world. Submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake. I asked the question on the sheet there, how many of man's laws may be disobeyed by a Christian, including speeding? I'm waiting for the answer. None. What's the speed limit in this road out here? And incidentally, this is a public road. It's not a private driveway. This is a road called the Watchtower. Yokefellow. Yeah, I gave it the name. Couldn't remember what I called it. Yeah, I had a Watchtower. That's Jehovah's Witnesses. That's the third time today I've done that. Where's Caden Mallory? I've made 3 mistakes, that 2 in class in one night. And I've never made that many mistakes in a row. I just did it. What's it called? Yokefellow. What's the speed limit out here? Anybody know? 10 miles an hour. Is there another sign that says 10 miles an hour? No, I don't think so. That's the speed limit. I tell the students that all the time, don't I? How fast are you driving? Don't answer that. I don't want to. You have to come forward if you do. You know why it's that slow? We've got children running around here all the time. There's a reason for it. What's the speed limit on 240? 55? I haven't seen that in a Memphis driver in 20 years. They're going 70 and 75 and 80 and 85 and 90 out there. Guess what's up now? The death rate. This year there's more being killed out there than there were last year. I wonder why. What about that speeding law? What about the taxes? Should we pay them? Yes, sir. Look over at Romans 13 a moment. I'm going to tell you how to avoid a traffic ticket. Admit my fault and then tell you how to get out of it. I did a very bad thing back in 1969. I was working the second shift at Dana Corporation, and I got off at 11:30, and I was coming down to go home, and the light was, I thought, just turning red, so I just sped up to get through it. And here he came. And he stopped me. He said, "You just ran that red light." I said, "Yes, sir." "And I'm so glad you stopped me." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because it's good for God's minister to stop me when I do wrong." He said, "What are you talking about?" And so I quoted Romans 13:4 to him. He is the minister of God that he forgot. He got so interested in that, he forgot to give me a ticket. If you want to get out of a ticket, fellows, there it is. The government is God's minister and against the evil and for the good, supposedly. Good government would be. But it is the case that we're to obey every ordinance of man for the elect's sake. Why? Because God ordered that government. The government we have right now, God put in place. That let every soul be subject to the higher powers, for the powers that be are ordered of God. And so it tells me that we got the government that we deserve, and this country certainly did. And that's what happens with God's law. Now, why would a Christian be obeying every ordinance? So he can provide for things honest to the community, verse 12. And so that's our effort. Now, we pay our tribute, to whom tribute's due, that's taxes, and so on. Whether it be to the king as supreme or unto governors. It's interesting that these people lived under an evil emperor, and yet they were to obey every ordinance of man for the elect's sake. Because the government's job is for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of them that do well. If they were to ever to ask me, I would tell the police department to stop people sometimes who are driving very well and praise them for it. Maybe that would change the atmosphere between the police and the community, I don't know. But it's the case that our job is to make theirs easier. Why? Verse 15. For so is the will of God, that with well-doing, watch this, you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. What can well-doing accomplish? Silence the critics of Christianity. When you help your neighbor, it's hard for him to criticize you. When you pray for your neighbor and you let him know that, criticism usually stops. When you go and visit him when he's in the hospital, things change between you and him. The community looks at us differently when we become servants to it. And I think I've said this to this congregation before, but brothers and sisters, when we put that sign up out here that said Church of Christ meets here, we became responsible for the sick, hungry, naked, thirsty, in prison folks in this community. I read that in Matthew the 25th chapter. When you read the qualification of an elder, that he's to be hospitable, I don't know what you thought that meant, but that person who becomes an elder must be one who is already seeking for those who need help. He looks out there for that. That's what that means in that verse, to be hospitable. But that's also a qualification of Christians, to be hospitable. And so it is the case that when we act that way, we usually silence the critics. They may not say a whole lot of good, but it may silence the critic. For so is the will of God, that your well-doing, with well-doing, you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men, as free. Freedom is not understood in this country at all. Not correctly. We speak about sexual freedom, but that's a terrible thought. This determinism that's taught in this country blames everything on our past, our parents, our environment. You're the way you are, Keith, and you're not to blame because your parents were such and such. I think sometimes preachers blame parents for the way the children turn out, and maybe that's not the case at all. That would be like blaming God for what the Israelites did. They were his children. As free. But what is freedom? Freedom for a Christian is doing what we ought to do and having the opportunity to do it. We're free to do what we ought to do. But we don't turn that freedom into maliciousness. Well, look, I'm a Christian and I'm free to, I'm better than. No. Peter says, don't act that way. Remember to whom he's writing here. These are people that the community wants to put to death for being Christians. That's rather hard, isn't it? As free and not using your liberty for a cloak of maliciousness. Look over at Jude 4 with me a moment. Don't ask me what chapter now. It's all one chapter, isn't it? Scott, read that for us. Jude 4. Watch this. They were acting as if they were free to do this. And if you believe that what you do in your body doesn't affect your soul, that kind of thinking will turn you into a lascivious person. They used their freedom in the wrong way. They treated the grace of God in the wrong way. God set me free to do what I ought to do. The truth makes me free, but not from doing what's right. And so freedom, why do we have green lights and red lights at the intersection? Isn't that a stop and a go? Well, aren't you free to go? Not when there's a stoplight, but the stoplight keeps you free from being what? Hit by the guy from the other way. Those two things are necessary. Law is necessary for freedom to work correctly. We're losing that in this country and even in the church. Men are arguing there's no law today for us. Yes, there is. And there is a law of Christ that makes us, or offers the opportunity to do what we ought to do. And here's what we ought to do. Watch now. Honor all men. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the king. Would you pull out that sheet on love the brotherhood, please? I wrote this all out because to me, in the middle of a letter that's written to people being put to death for their faith, this is a magnificent, almost unusual request. That fellow that just arrested you, honor him. That king who ordered your arrest, honor him. But fear God. He's the one that could destroy both your soul and hell, body and hell. Matthew 10:28. So honor the king, men, honor the king, fear God, but love the brotherhood. I wrote, it is relevant to note that we often associate people with certain events and attributes. The Great Depression brings us up Herbert Hoover's name. Cuba reminds us of Castro. The polio vaccine and Dr. Salk are forever linked. A muscular body brings to mind Charles Atlas, and so on. But it is the case that the word love and the word should be the words love and Peter are not connected. We've got to fix that. The words love and Peter are not connected. I don't have a pen. But the apostle wrote, love the brotherhood. Paul emphasized faith, but often wrote about love. We don't often expect Peter to. But he's writing to a people facing death and says, love the brotherhood. How? Sincerely. The way the Lord loved them. We don't love a man who is a Christian simply because of his financial standing, or not because of his race or ethnicity and so on. All of those thoughts have to be removed. This is the place, brothers and sisters, the church, where all of our pasts mean nothing. This is the place, like ancient Israel, where all the assembly is invited to the Passover. It didn't matter where they lived or what house it was or what kind of a house, 2-story, 10-story. If they were covered by the blood, they all received the same benefit. They were a family. The word congregation is used in the scriptures the first time in connection with the Passover. Exodus chapter 12. To indicate this is a different kind of a situation. And this was the only feast that was held in the home. All the other feasts were national feasts out there and there and there. But this one was in the home. They were a family now, not just a group of people, but a family. And Peter says here, you love that brotherhood. You've got some brothers and sisters over there, they're going to be put to death. You've got some over there scattered all over the place. These folks are kicked out of their houses. You love that brotherhood sincerely. And I learned today that bigotry is still a disease among some. To me, that's the saddest thing that can be said about us as Christians. In the second place, Peter says this has to be a fervent love. Not warm, hot, constant. Somebody read Acts 12:5, please. Acts 12:5.
Prayer was offered to God for him by the church.
I cannot even begin to thank you enough for the hundreds or maybe even thousands of prayers that have been offered for Dorothy. It works, brothers and sisters. She's received probably 200 cards in the mail over these last 4 months. What a great uplift that is to her. She misses terribly being around you. And many of you have told me you miss seeing her. What is all of that? You know, if you can learn to love Jerry Manning, you can almost love anything. Go ahead. Go ahead, give it back to me. I deserved it. That's true. That's why I'm such a character. Fervent. I want you to think about something for just a moment. Think seriously about it, please. When they get up Sunday morning and read that list of those who are sick, tell me why they're reading it. Because if we don't, they get upset with us. What are they expecting us to do? When I was sick, you visited me. Think about it and love one another fervently. That's not warm, that's hot. And this is a family idea, as I've already said. And functional groups act that way. Dysfunctional groups don't. I tell the students something. I'm going to give away a secret here that we preachers know. I say, when you go to try out, stand out in the foyer when it's dismissal time and watch what happens. If they're reluctant to leave and they're hanging around one another and they're talking, that's the congregation where you want to go. If they're all running out the door, you may not want to go there. That's too cold a place. I was in a congregation like that. It finally became warm through the efforts of so many there. But I love it when you folks like to hang around and talk. In fact, it seems to me that there's a chance for me to preach in the hallway out there with many of you out there. We'll have second service right out there. God bless you for the way you are and the way you treat one another.